Hey there, I'm Justyn, and it's a joy to be continuing our 7 series with you. Now, we're recording this and it's mid-June, and I'm thinking about summer holidays. I've been thinking about summer holidays since December the 27th, but anyway, I am really thinking about summer holidays now. I wonder if you're getting away this year. I wonder if you're flying somewhere. I wonder if you've ever flown first class. I have flown first class once in my life. I was working for a theatre company in Italy. I did a week's writing with them, and they got me back to the airport late. So I had to spend a whole nother day in Italy. Oh, what a trauma. And then fly back the next day. The flight from Bari to Munich was pretty normal, pretty okay. But then in Munich, as I got towards the gate, I realised I didn't have a boarding pass for Munich to Birmingham. So I went up to the desk and asked, I've got a ticket, but I don't have a boarding pass. And I said, oh, you need to go to that desk over there. So I went to the desk and said, hey, I've got a ticket, but I don't have a boarding pass. And the attendant looked on the computer and said, yeah, you've got a ticket, but no seats. And unfortunately, all the seats have now gone. It's like, oh, well, what does that mean? And she looked, she said, well, I think the only thing I can do, Mr. Towler, is put you in first class. Now, I was trying not to giggle and scream and air fist myself, and I just kept composed and said, well, if that's all you can do, then, well, that's all you can do. That will have to be adequate. I walked away secretly going, yes, finally, the world has recognised my value and I'm going to be travelling in first class luxury. Now, normally at airports, when everyone jumps up to queue, I just stay sitting down. I'm like, we're taking off at the same time, we're landing at the same time. I'll let you queue at the gate, I'll just chill in my seat here. But as everyone was queuing, I noticed them pull a little barrier alongside the outside of the queue and then put up a little sign, priority boarding, first class. It's like, I can swan all the way down this queue. So I grabbed my bag, walked all the way to the front of the queue, looking at all the peasants in cattle class. I was like, oh, sucks to be you. I'm first class. Walked straight to the front of the queue. The lady stopped serving the person she was serving, jumped to my side and said, oh yes, Mr. Towler, first class, come on straight down. And I felt like royalty as I minced onto the air bridge ahead of everybody else, looking forward to my first class experience. So we're in this series, the 7 less deadly sins. I once heard another Free Methodist pastor say, every generation fears the sin they're least likely to commit. I think sometimes we think of the big sins, don't we? Or big things in our minds like, oh, I must never do that. But often there's other things going on in our life that perhaps we're not aware of. And we might think they're not as deadly, but actually they don't have a great impact on our spiritual life. And the sin I want us to think about today is the sin of self-righteousness. The sin of self-righteousness. Jesus tells this cracking little story in Luke 18. Let me read it to you from verses 9 to 14. To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood apart by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give 1/10 of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. I think we live in a world of self justification. We see it all the time from our celebrities, from our politicians, from our national figures who are always telling us, well, what they've done is okay and it's everybody else who's the problem. It's not me that's guilty, it's somebody else who's said something or done something, or don't look at what I've done, but look over there at what's happening. That's the problem. Constantly trying to justify and prove their own righteousness. You know, in the church, we can be just as bad. For a group of people who believe that all have sinned, sometimes we can be really good at letting people know that we think their sin is actually a lot worse than ours. And it's to that kind of attitude and those kind of people that Jesus tells this story. He introduces two characters, a Pharisee and a tax collector. Now, in Jesus' day, a Pharisee would have been somebody very, very religious, very, very devoted to Torah, to the Jewish law. In fact, their whole worldview would be that because the Jewish people have stopped following God's law, that's why they're in the mess that they're in. That's why the Romans have come and occupied their land. That's why they're not free as a nation. That's why they're oppressed. And if everybody would just go back to living right, then God would come and set them free again. So the Pharisees are very, very keen and very, very passionate about following the rules and protecting the holiness, the sacredness of Jewish life. The tax collector is also a Jew, but he's someone who is aligned with the Roman Empire. So on behalf of Rome, the tax collector is collecting taxes from other Jewish people, often more collecting than they should have done, taking more taxes, and really is a hated character. Somebody who has almost betrayed their Jewish roots in order to just get ahead financially. And Jesus tells this story. And I think Jesus makes 3 points that we can think about when we wonder, are we a bit self-righteous? I think the 3 points Jesus makes are this: where do we stand? What do we see? And what do we say? Where do we stand? So they both go up to the temple to pray. Now, this isn't a private moment of prayer. This is not a private devotion. We get a sense from the text in Luke that this is a corporate moment. In Acts chapter 3, Luke tells us that Peter and John go up to the temple at the time of prayer. And so we think that it was probably tradition amongst the Jews of the time that when the sacrifices were happening at set times through the day, as many as could would gather in the temple at that moment, look through into the inner courts, and would come to pray as the sacrifices were happening. So this was a corporate time of prayer. That might have been what's happening in this story that Jesus is telling. Whether that is happening or not, we know it's a corporate moment because they're both defined by where they stand in relation to others. So they haven't come alone, they've come to something that's happening together. The Pharisee, Jesus tells us, stood by himself. The tax collector stands at a distance. Jesus isn't getting at the geography of these two. He's getting at the hearts of these two. You see, the Pharisee is there, but he's setting himself apart from everybody else. A bit like me swanning down the side of the tensor barrier. You know, that barrier is millimeters thin, and yet to me it felt like I'm miles apart from all of these people. We're literally a meter apart, but I'm first class. It's a bit like the Pharisee. He's saying, well, I'm here, but there's a barrier between us. I am better than you. I'm going to distance myself slightly. Listen to what he says. You hear it in his speech. God, I thank you that I am not like other people. You know, as Christians, we're called to be set apart, but we're not set above. Let me say that again. We're called to be set apart, but we're not set above. We're not called to think of ourselves as better than other people around us, to put up barriers where we think, oh, we're doing great and we're more important, and actually you're, ugh. We're not called to stand apart from others. Jesus is the most holiest person to ever walk the planet. He's the most set apart being that we can look to, and yet he's constantly surrounding himself by those caught in sin, by those who aren't getting things right, by those that other people would hate and push against, and Jesus is right there in the midst of them. Jesus is never standoffish. How do we know we might be being self-righteous? Well, where do we think we stand in regards to other people? The Pharisee thinks he's better, so he stands apart. The tax collector, where does he stand? Well, he stands at a distance. Now, if you come to any of our renewal locations, Jesus isn't saying sit at the back. Well, sit at the back if you want to sit at the back, sit wherever you want. But again, it's the heart issue of the tax collector is there, but he knows I'm standing here, but actually I don't deserve to stand here. The Pharisee thinks he's better. The tax collector knows, actually, I can't stand here on my own merit. Grace. Grace is a concept that is foundational to who we are as Christians, and yet I think we all struggle with it. That everything we have is not because of us, but because of God's unmerited, undeserved, abundant, generous nature to give it to us. So often we feel it's based on our performance, don't we? My wife has decided that for our 6-year-old and our 8-year-old, it will be great for their spiritual development to bring them to the evening gathering at Solihull once a month. And I'm like, love, I think it would be great for their academic development for me to bring them to your classroom once a month, and we'll sit on the front row and see how you get on. I mean, there is nothing like opening a baptism gathering when you've just threatened to drown your own 6-year-old in the tank for misbehaving. You're like, will you sit down? And then suddenly you're having to lead God's people. And if you've ever had an argument with somebody on the way to church, or you've come in and you've just suddenly realised, oh man, I have messed this up this week. And it takes the first worship song for you to go, oh God, please forgive me and help me. Or maybe you've had the opposite experience where actually you get to church and you're like, oh, I'm doing great. I've read my Bible every day this week. I've done all my praying this week. I've not sworn at anybody in the car on the way in. I am doing great. Let's get straight into worship. You know, neither attitude are actually right. We don't come before God based on anything that we have done. As the song says, our hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and his righteousness. Where do we stand? Well, if we think we stand on anything but the grace of God, we're falling into a self-righteous attitude. The Pharisee thinks he's better, so he stands apart. The tax collector knows he needs to stand in grace. Where do you stand? And then what do you see? The gaze of both of these characters, I think, is really, really interesting. Because the Pharisee is praying, but he's looking around and he's going, thank God I'm not like all these other people. Have you ever wondered how you're doing in life? And then you see somebody, or you have a conversation with someone, you meet somebody, and you come away going, oh no, phew, I'm fine. Oh, phew, I'm doing great. Because compared to them, whew, man, they're in a right mess. At least I've got this and this and this together. I don't know if you've ever had that experience. Maybe you're looking at me now and going, Justyn, what a horrible thing to think. No, I've never had that experience. Well, maybe you're having that experience right now looking at me. You know, self-righteousness is not based on self as much as we think it is. It's based on self compared to everybody else. So if everyone is lounging in first class, if every seat was first class, if everybody was getting priority treatment, we wouldn't feel special. We feel special because we're not like all of these peasants having to wait. The Pharisee is looking around going, I am above everybody else here. I fast twice a week. Well, that's a really interesting comment from him. The Old Testament doesn't ask Pharisees to fast twice a week, actually. That's something he's decided to do himself. And also, how does he know everybody else there isn't? He just assumes, well, I'm doing better than everybody else. But spirituality was never a competition. Your relationship with God is never based in comparison to what others are doing. It's between you and him. The tax collector gets this because he just looks down. He's not looking around to see how everybody else is doing. He's not comparing himself to others. He's not going, oh, look at that Pharisee over there. He's looking down going, God, all that matters is my heart before you. And God, I need you right now because I know what's in my heart. When it comes to a self-righteous attitude, where do we stand? We can't stand on anything other than grace. And if we're trying to stand apart from others, maybe we're stepping into self-righteousness. We can't be looking around to make sure we're doing better. Just find me somebody I'm doing better than. No. We just need to consider our own hearts before God. And then last point, what are you saying? Our confession is huge, isn't it? If you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth, you will be saved. What comes out of our mouth is such a key indicator of the attitudes within our heart. And everything that the Pharisee confesses is how good he is. I do this, I fast, I tithe, I'm not like. Everything the tax collector says is I am a sinner. God, I need you. But look at the way the Pharisee talks about others. Sometimes the way we talk about others gives us an insight into our own attitude. See, when we're self-righteous, we raise our divinity and we degrade the humanity of those around us. I'm not like these others, robbers, adulterers, evildoers. How does he know that the people in the crowd are like that? And why is it any of his business to say it anyway? And then he even says, even this tax collector. We get a sense in self-righteousness of elevating ourselves up and making ourselves more God-like. And then we degrade those around us. What's interesting is Jesus pours this same behaviour straight back on the Pharisee. When Jesus comes to his conclusion, he says that the tax collector goes home justified and not the Pharisee. But his exact wording is interesting. The best word-for-word translation I can find is this one. Of verse 14, Jesus says this, I say to you, this one went down to his house justified rather than that. You see, the Pharisee degrades everyone in his language. And when Jesus comes to bring his conclusion, he describes the tax collector as this one, this individual, this one that I see. He's been made right before God, but that hasn't. It's almost like he's stripping the Pharisee of his identity. He doesn't even give him the dignity of calling him a one. He just goes, that attitude of standing apart and thinking you're better than others. That attitude of looking around at how everyone else is doing just to make yourself feel better. That attitude of just talking about all the good things that you're doing compared to how rubbish everybody else is doing. That will not be justified. But this one, who knows he doesn't deserve to be standing here, but he's standing on grace. This one who's just got his eyes on his own heart and his own condition before God. This one who's willing to confess, I am a sinner and God have mercy. This one is justified. Self-righteousness, where do you stand? What do you see? And what do you say? So I was walking down the air bridge telling myself that finally the world had come to recognise the quality of international artist that I was. And finally it upgraded me to my rightful place of first class, looking forward to turning left. And as I tried to turn left as I stepped onto the plane, the cabin crew said, "No, so that's the cockpit, you need to go this way." I went, no, I'm first class, got on my boarding pass, Justyn Towler, first class, that's me, first one on. She went, "Oh, yes, sir. The first class seat is this way." I was like, first class seat? I was like, first class bed with a first class bar or maybe a first class shower. What do you mean first class seats? You see, what I should have realised, and I should have realised because I was on the same plane on the journey out, is that on a propeller plane that has about 45 seats on it and is in the air for about an hour, first class, it's not actually that great an experience. Here's the first class experience. You sit at the front and you get a free copy of the Daily Telegraph. And then it gets worse, because once you've taken off, the cabin crew come and go, "Ah, sir," and they pull a little curtain around you. A little bit like the curtain you get in a hospital bay. Just a tiny, thin bit of paper so that all the plebs can't see you. I've got to be honest, I felt like a right idiot. I'd built up in my mind this incredible experience that I deserved, to find it had come down to a free paper and a tiny thin curtain. It got even more humiliating as we were coming into land at Birmingham and the cabin crew came back and went, "Sorry sir, I need to pull this back now," and pulled the curtain back round me, to which the person sat next to me turned their head and looked at me as if to say, "Who do you think you are? You've paid more money to have a curtain pulled between us." Felt so awkward. I said, "Oh no, I didn't pay for this. I got upgraded because they didn't check me in properly in Italy, and I know I'm just normally trying." I just couldn't find the words to talk myself out of the humiliation that I felt. But it's a great picture of self-righteousness, because you sat on the same plane, in the same seat, going to the same destination with just a tiny bit of curtain to make you feel like you're slightly better than everybody else, when in reality, we're all the same. In the Old Testament, Isaiah the prophet speaks out on behalf of God, and he rails against a self-righteous attitude. Isaiah 65:5, it says, "They say, 'Keep away, don't come near me, for I am too sacred for you.' Such people are smoke in my nostrils, a fire that keeps burning all day." The sin of self-righteousness is so deadly because it makes us start to trust in ourselves rather than God, and we become smoke in the nostrils of the one we say we love. So maybe this week, just think about, where do I think I stand? When I look at other people, what am I seeing? And what am I saying? Because our hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and his righteousness. God bless you.
Thank you for joining us for our message. If there was something that resonated with you, or you want to explore a little bit more about Jesus, then go to renewalcc.com/next steps. You can fill out the form there and we can connect with you. Also, if you have a question for the team or you just want to say hello, then you can get in contact with us at hello@renewalcc.com and one of the team will be in touch with you. Also, we want you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can also go to renewalcc.com/media, where you can find our Spotify and Apple podcast channels, where you can find all our messages and all our online content, and there's a new episode being released every Monday. Finally, if you like the work that we do, you can also donate to Renewal. If you go to renewalcc.com/give, you can find all the ways in which you can give into the life of Renewal. But thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.